COVID-19. But what's troubling about these young adults and children who are becoming more likely to be infected with COVID-19 is that they are living with adults who may not do as well if they were infected. As parents, we want our kids to be active. We want them to be able to enjoy the community, to be out with others. But we know that any interaction outside the home increases the likelihood of becoming infected with COVID-19 as long as this virus is out and available in the community. Playing sports, play dates, hang out with friends can all be done safely with social distancing and wearing masks. Wearing masks is now mandatory. It's important. They must be worn to protect us all. Young people often have a feeling of invincibility, and chances are they would fare better than their parents or grandparents if they became positive with COVID-19. And that's why I'm calling on all of our teens and young adults to think about the ones that they love when they're out and about. Anyone can be asymptomatic, especially our young people, can be a carrier of this virus and not have any symptoms. So please be responsible, protect those that you love, and remember, all of us have to do our part. The day before the mask mandate went into effect last week, the St. Louis County Department of Public Health gave away 150,000 masks in the County Health Department. And beginning today, our 20 St. Louis Library branch locations will be a place where anyone can get a mask who needs one. We will continue to work to get masks to everyone in our community who needs a mask. We will continue to work with any community group who wants to help us distribute masks. We've also created a face coverings required sign that is available to be downloaded at sdlcorona.com. On the websites are also instructions on how to report any violations. But let's be clear, we want our businesses to stay open. That's why we have this mask requirement. We want our businesses to be able to keep their employees safe and their patrons safe. Wearing a mask is an important part of that process. Wearing a mask may be inconvenient, but it's a trade-off we make to keep ourselves safe, to keep our patrons and our businesses safe, to keep employees safe, and to keep us on course for this gradual reopening. We also continue to increase access to testing. In St. Louis County, we can now test regularly over 1,000 people a day. We are well on our way to our goal of testing 1,500 people a day. We hope to reach that goal in the coming weeks. One way to do this is to offer pop-up testing, and we'll be doing this starting today in St. Louis County. They will be in Lemay, Bell Fountain Neighbors, and the North Side Seventh-day Adventist Church. Appointments are needed. Appointments can be made through stlcorona.com or at 615-0574. With all of our businesses able to reopen at 50% of their capacity according to their fire codes, the next step is to get our schools open. Tomorrow, the schools are expected to release the reopening guidelines. Our school superintendents have been working together, public school superintendents, parochial school superintendents, and independent schools, along with our health department, to develop guidelines for reopening. These certainly schools will look a little different with social distancing, but we believe that our schools have a plan to keep kids safe, to keep their staff safe, and to keep teachers safe. So in order to have consistency, the schools have worked with our public health department to develop guidelines, and they'll be announcing them tomorrow. The schools will announce all of their guidelines directly to their students and to their parents through the normal communication processes. Later this week, we'll be announcing the details on reopening the county administration building. We've been working hard along with all of our department directors to come up with new and innovative ways to serve St. Louis County residents. They've taken the opportunity of this time to come up with creative ways to serve our residents and to help our businesses in St. Louis County operate successfully, and to provide new innovations in their services. And I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Dr. Pace, why do you think we're seeing more cases in young people, and what about that is so concerning to you?
Well, the new cases in young people really is consistent with that invincibility that comes with being a teenager and a young adult. They necessarily don't believe the rules apply to them in general, and so we're working hard to get them not just to think about themselves, but to think about their parents and grandparents who may be the recipient of a COVID-19 infection that's passed along by an asymptomatic child or friend of a child or a grandchild.
Dr. Page, there's a lot of frustration right now because I think there are so many people who are following the rules and who understand, the masks and all the guidelines and everything, and then you see other people in places just sometimes blatantly ignore them, and I think it's difficult for people because they feel like, well, what's the point? What good is this doing? We saw that once again this past weekend over the 4th of July. So, what kind of words of wisdom can you offer on that scenario? I think people are frustrated.
So the question is how to manage the frustrations of the people who are following the rules, who are wearing masks, and when they see others who choose to not follow the rules or not wear the masks. And the only answer I have is that wearing masks protects you and protects others from you. It's the right thing to do, and there are others who will be slower to adopt this, but this is exactly what we have to do in our community to maintain our position as one of the locations in this country that is much better off. We're much better off because we made those tough decisions about stay-at-home orders very early in the process. Before just about anyone in the country, we were slow and gradual and thoughtful in our reopening, and we're in a really good spot. But if we don't make good decisions as a community, if we don't get masks widely adopted in our businesses, and when we can't social distance, when we're less than 6 feet away from others, then we're going to face the same challenges as the rest of the country. But we have to adopt these. It's frustrating to see folks that aren't making those decisions, but we're going to work together to get the word out. We're going to work together to create the right peer pressure. We're going to work together to empower our businesses to protect their employees and their patrons from individuals who may be coming in, maybe asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic carriers of COVID-19, and have the ability to transmit that to others in those places of business.
And then going back just to the back to school, what do you have to say to parents? Obviously the plans haven't been released yet, but I think daycare is going to be a big concern among parents, not wanting to necessarily have to, they might have to work from home, but their kid might still have to be there a couple days. What do you have to say to, parents with concerns about that?
Well, so the question about reopening guidelines and messaging for parents, what I've seen is that our school superintendents have been very flexible in creating these guidelines, been very thoughtful that virtual learning will still be available to some who choose it. I've seen that in some school districts who've already started communicating through surveys to their parents about options for virtual learning for kids that can't come to school or aren't ready to come back to school. But I think it's important to get some sort of traditional learning environment in place and have a pathway to move forward in a way that's safe. So for parents, I would say to continue to communicate with your school districts. There will be unique situations for each school district, but the guidelines in general will be extraordinarily similar. Continue to work with your school districts, continue to work with your daycare providers. I think what you'll find is that most people in our community are going to be extraordinarily flexible. They know this is a difficult time, and good, thoughtful, civil, and diplomatic communication can solve a whole lot of problems.
Can you give me a preview of what might be coming here? Are kids going to have to wear masks to school, especially with these increasing cases in young people? What are we looking at here?
Well, I'm sure that masks will be part of those guidelines, but I think it's better to let the schools release those guidelines together through the normal communication process with parents and kids, rather than to walk through those guidelines specifically today. But masks and principles, the fundamentals of social distancing will be part of those guidelines.
Just say generally speaking, and you alluded to it there, generally speaking, what's the parents expect here? Masks, social distancing,
Parents
stuff like
should expect masks and social distancing guidelines that are consistent with what we see and require currently in the rest of the community, and then some specifics that are only seen in schools, some specifics to gathering students, to class sizes, to, there'll be new guidelines for student athletics, there'll be new guidelines for assemblies. All of these things will be consistent with the fundamental principles of social distancing, wearing a mask, frequent hand washing, staying home with your sick, and those sort of things.
Mask can be an expectation of kids.
Mask would be an expectation to be part of this, yes.
But you think there can be school in some regards?
I think that we will have a process to get started with school. We'll have a process to cancel school if they have an outbreak or someone is sick. But all of those details will be in the guidelines that are released by the school districts tomorrow.
Is there a concern about cases being up with young people and going back to school? Is there?
Yeah, I think we have to continue to follow the fundamentals of social distancing and wearing a mask, staying home if you're sick, being isolated or quarantining if you've been exposed to someone who's known to be COVID-19 positive. All of those fundamentals still apply around the school. If you've been around someone who's sick, who has COVID-19, then you should be quarantined until you're cleared by the public health department. You should be wearing a mask when you can't social distance. You should avoid crowds when possible. You should be limiting the size of gatherings. All these things are the same principles that we've applied to businesses, to banquet centers, to other activities in our community, and those will be applied to school and then adapted for all the activities that we find at schools. Some of those activities will be modified, and we'll find a way to keep our kids safe, our teachers safe, and the staff safe, and we'll have plans for when there's an outbreak or concerns.
Any concerns about transportation for students? In the springtime when we first saw the outbreak and schools had closed, we saw that a couple bus drivers die. You know, it's typically already an area where they have trouble recruiting to find bus drivers. Any concerns about how that's going?
We're concerned with school buses like we would be concerned with bi-state. We would expect the drivers to have masks, kids to have masks, and there'll be more details about school transportation as part of these guidelines too. I mean, that's part of the process. When you start to interact with something that's considered the school or an extension of the school, like riding a bus to school, the rules and regulations of schools will apply.
In some districts, like where Mike is going, Rockwood have put out general guidelines about either distance learning or back in school. What's come out tomorrow? Will that like be more uniform for all of the school districts, like big picture guidelines, or what are we looking at?
Well, I think you'll see each school district will be communicating guidelines to their students and their parents. There may be some slight changes that are specific to that school system or the activities that are frequently found in that school. But in general, the superintendents have been working very closely together to make these guidelines as uniform as possible, and I would expect them to be very similar throughout public schools, parochial schools, and independent schools. I would expect all these guidelines to be very similar, but it's important that they're communicated through the normal communication channels that are maintained by the school districts.
And I have to ask, will there be football in the fall?
Well, we'll see how that goes. That'll be, youth sports will continue to be something that gets our attention because sporting activities are something that has some risk to it if they aren't done with social distancing, mask requirements, and the appropriate guidelines. But we'll start with some recommendations for school sports, depending on the type of sport, that will look similar to the recommendations that were provided to sporting leagues throughout the summer. Okay, is that any questions?
I'm good.
Okay, thanks everybody.